I hope you all enjoyed or you're enjoying all the conversations you're having, and you continue to enjoy this wonderful conference. I've lost count of how many times I've come. It's at least 12. But it's a joy for us, the Simon Foundation, to work with the Philanthropy Roundtable on administering this prize. They took the ball and ran with it, and we've just been doing it with them ever since. And it was we have our one of our quarterly or semi-annual meetings for the foundation always at this meeting. And our first gift up was funding the prize for next year, which of course we did. I hope I'm not spoiling the surprise, but anyway. But we're grateful to the selection committee, of which we've had many members, but this year especially Frank Baxter, Heather Dill, who spoke this morning, and Adam. They're here with us today. And thank you for your hard work and your thoughtful judgment in helping us as a family, as a board, is an invaluable asset. Our first 4 or 5 years, we sort of just came up with the names ourselves among our family, and we realized we needed to spread our wings a little bit, and that's what we did. So last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize Adam Meyerson, as he was done so well this morning. But if I can add my 2 cents, I do speak here and there and many times on philanthropy, and he is my go-to, always has been my go-to guy. He's always up to date on his facts. He always calls me back. And he's just a delightful guy to work with. And he's given me more help with more talks, and I'm really grateful. But I'm also grateful for the way he ran the organization. Everybody is top flight. They're all pros. Many of them have gone on to work for other charities because their quality is so high. Anyway, Adam, thank you for your thoughtful guidance on this prize all these years. But thank you to the whole Philanthropy Roundtable staff for all that you've done. I'd like to take a moment to say a few words about my parents, Bill and Carol Simon. Mom and Dad came from modest backgrounds, growing up in New Jersey. Mom's father warned her not to date my father, who was a little on the wild side. He said he will never make anything of himself. I think Dad took that as a challenge, and with hard work and determination, and also 3 kids, he was a great success in business. He served as Secretary of the Treasury during the Nixon and Ford administrations after a meteoric rise on Wall Street. And it was our ever-patient mother who kept the 7 of us kids in line, for the most part, and through her loving guidance helped both Dad and us kids reach a lot of the potential we had. Dad was our nation's first energy czar. He took the reins as president of the United States Olympic Committee during the tumultuous time following the 1980 boycott. Remember, Jimmy Carter was president, and Dad didn't quite vote for Jimmy, but anyway, he said, we got to let our president call this. That's his call, and that was it. And so we didn't go to Russia, because it was in Russia. Anyway, then he became president of the U.S. Olympic Foundation and the U.S. Olympic Committee in the 1984 games, which were in L.A., and they actually made a $200 million profit, which they split with the city. They made that deal up front. The city took 100, and the U.S. Olympic Foundation took 100. And to this day, we manage that money. We help athletes with their expenses. But with all these accomplishments, Dad's family was his responsibility, accepted it, and he was a very good steward of his wealth. He taught us all as children to be very mindful, to understand philanthropy, to be thoughtful about it. We founded the foundation about 5 years before he died, got him to agree to a mission statement, and we've executed for the last 20 years since he's gone, or 19 years. And it's been a real glue for our family, and I recommend it to any people out here that are thinking of founding either if you have a foundation, if your children are involved, think about it. It's been a real glue for all of us as siblings. So the purpose of this ceremony is to salute ideals that Dad carried close to his heart: effective philanthropy and helping people to help themselves. This year's winner certainly reflects Dad's ideals in philanthropy. Russ Carson is one of the founding partners of Welsh, Carson, Anderson & Stowe, one of the country's largest private equity firms, very successful and a real pioneer. Russ is a donor who believes in leading with both his business acumen and his resources, but also his good judgment. Every organization that he's told me about, he joins the board and somehow magically ends up as chair. And it's not for any other reason that he's a good leader. And leadership is so crucial for all these organizations to do well. But he is chairman of the Partnership for Inner City Education. He's co-chairman of the New York Genome Center. He's chairman emeritus of the Rockefeller University and Columbia Business School. He's a trustee emeritus at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Dartmouth College, and currently serves on the boards of the New York Presbyterian Hospital System, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, and the Coalition for Opportunity in Education. I've had the pleasure of working with Russ for many years on the Partnership for Inner City Education and serving on panels talking about Catholic education, which is, to me and to Russ, it's the best deal in town. But believe it or not, Catholic schools all over the country have empty seats. And they are, in some cases, half the price of the cost per student in the towns that they're in. And yet they still have empty seats because they're usually in the poor neighborhoods, and the families have to fund at least some of it, and they can't do it. So Russ and I have done this together, and we've enjoyed ourselves, and he's just a rare philanthropist who donates all of this, but best of all, his judgment. So today will be the opportunity for us to learn more about Russ's education giving, and also how he focuses on giving in his adopted hometown of New York City. Let's learn a little bit more about Russ and his impact on his hometown in this short video. Roll it.
As New York is big and expansive and welcoming and daring, so is Russ. What invites us to dream and dare big is worth affirming. And that's what Russ does.
I'm Wendy Gold. I'm the student body president at Columbia Business School for the class of 2019. And what really drew me to Columbia was the social enterprise program.
The purpose of the Social Enterprise Program is to train Columbia Business School students in leadership and management techniques that will help them make the world and our environment a better place.
We cannot think about business in a silo. Business is part of economy, it's part of policy, it's part of what's happening politically in our country right now.
Organizations are nothing. They're just pieces of paper. To us, it's the people in those organizations that make them successful. If I had to measure impact, I would take a very simple thing, and that is the number of my students who've risen to leadership positions. Success to me is basically it's having students like Lindy Gould.
When we religious leaders speak about stewardship, we speak about time, talent, and treasure, and Russ gives them. Exhibit A of that is the Partnership Schools. Professionals that have been financially generous to your schools are now going to actually take over some governance in a few of them, and that Russ chose 6.
Our number one root belief is that children and learning come first. Every family, every child is working to live out that root belief.
My name is Aldir Ochoa. I graduated from Our Lady Queen of Angels, class of 2015. I went to public school. Teachers, to me, it seemed like they just didn't care enough. I just wasn't doing anything fun or wasn't doing anything that put me in a position where I could learn more and experience more. Going to Our Lady Queen of Angels, it just changed it. I guess the school is one of those very few schools that put the students in front of the teachers and want to show that these are the people that are going to change the world later on.
There are a lot of organizations studying genomics because it's a huge field, but I don't know of another that is so collaborative as this one. This was the vision of Russ and other philanthropists early on, to bring the community together and do it in a different way, so that we could bring together patients and samples, particularly for diseases that are not so frequent in the population.
The remarkable thing about genomics is that the technology is moving extremely rapidly.
I'm Himali Fatnani, and I direct the Center for Genomics of Neurodegenerative Disease at the New York Genome Center. The challenge of ALS, it's actually quite difficult. You need large numbers of samples. You can't get them from any one clinic because it's so rare.
Himali has done an incredible job of bringing the community together, not just within New York, but internationally.
We can serve as the convening site. We can put into place the administrative infrastructure that allows pooling and sharing of data at this scale. So now people want to apply this to many different diseases.
To lead us in a conversation with Russ, we are honored to be joined by Jim Perry, co-founder and managing director of Madison Dearborn Partners, a private equity firm in Chicago. He's chairman of Empower Illinois and an active supporter of Catholic education. Please join me in welcoming Russ and Jim to the stage.
Well, that was pretty intimidating, I'll tell you that. As a young guy in this, younger guy, but on my way to more philanthropy myself in my own career. So congratulations and thank you for all you do. So I'm told that your path to this chair is an unlikely one. Apparently you came out of college intending maybe to spend a career in the Midwest. You're from Toledo, Ohio. Went to Harvard, went to Columbia Business School, went to New York, figuring you'd never make a full life out of New York City. And then found a job at Citicorp, which led you to the venture capital division there. And then that spurred you to move out and start your own firm in 1979, Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and so that Peter mentioned, which really is and was at the time and is to this day a pioneer in independent private equity, having now raised over $1 billion, and having created many companies, many small companies into very big companies, and provided growth financing for growing companies. It's a remarkable story with that's created tremendous value for investors, for employers, for communities, and that, of course, was the seed capital for your career in your new professional career in philanthropy. So maybe it would be interesting to talk to you a little bit, or maybe talk to all of us a little bit about that transition. At what point did you determine that philanthropy would be an important part of you and your family's life? When did it happen? Was it an abrupt? Did it take time for it to evolve?
Sure, let me give you a little background. Before I do that, let me also say I couldn't be more honored to be the recipient of the William E. Simon Award. I remember Bill Simon from the days when he was Treasury Secretary. My family and I had the opportunity last night to have dinner with the Simon family, and congratulations to all of you. The Simon family is just a wonderful group of people, and I couldn't be more honored to be getting an award named after your dad. You know, in my own case, my life has been a happy accident. I grew up in the Midwest. I was very fortunate. My parents were both well educated. I had 3 sisters and a brother. We had a very happy home life. I went to Dartmouth College. I didn't particularly know what I was going to do after Dartmouth. The only thing I knew was that at the time I was classified 1A in the military draft, so I was going to be taking a trip to Vietnam if I didn't do something. So I went to business school and happily got to Columbia, went from Columbia to Citicorp, where I stayed 11 years. Then left that to start Welch, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe with 2 partners who remain among my best friends today. When we started the firm, I think all 3 of us did it more for the intellectual challenge of doing it as opposed to any money that we might have made out of it. Our expectations were relatively modest.
Well, your first fund was only $33 million. I mean,
we set out to raise $15 to $20 million. We wound up raising $33 million, which we thought was all the money in the world. The 3 of us all did it the right way. We quit our jobs, so it took us 6 months to raise the money when we were unemployed. I had a wife and 2 small kids. That was a very exciting time. But you know, it had a happy ending. We started a firm. We thought it would probably take us 10 years to invest the money, then we might raise a second fund. We invested all the money in 2 years, raised a second fund, and the business just kept spiraling. As of today, the fund has raised 17 institutionally funded partnerships with $27 billion of capital. And,
incredible.
You know, I couldn't sit here today and tell you that I thought that was how it was all going to turn out. It was a very happy accident, a lot of fun along the way. But having grown up in the family that I grew up in, my parents were both very concerned with the community in Toledo, Ohio, where I grew up. I always felt that there was something more to life than just making money. And when I began to make money, and making a whole lot more money than I ever expected to, I began to think seriously about what I was going to do with it. And it rapidly became obvious to me that the answer wasn't to leave it all to my kids. There was more than enough to take care of them and to take care of my wife, Judy, and I. And,
she's right there. Is that true?
My kids disagree with that. You know, I decided to try and begin to get involved in some things in the community, and you know, this sort of transpired over a period of time. I'd say in my late 40s, early 50s, I was asked sort of out of the blue to go on the board of the Metropolitan Museum. I didn't really know anything about art. I didn't collect art, but I thought this might be an interesting opportunity to do something, meet some people that I wouldn't know otherwise. In the same way, through serendipity, I was asked to go on the board of Rockefeller University, which is, for those of you who don't know it, it's probably the world's foremost biomedical research institution. I went on that board, and things just sort of evolved over time where I found they were a good outlet for my philanthropy, but more than that, I just kept getting more and more involved. And Jim and I talked yesterday, and I said there was no one point in time when I stopped working and spent all my time doing philanthropy. It was a glide path that really started, you know, in rough terms, it started at age 50. I'm 76 today. A year ago, I gave up my office at the firm and set up, or 2 years ago, I set up my own foundation and family office. But for me, it was just a very comfortable transition of trying to use the same skills that I developed in business to see if I could make some real difference in society.
You know, I recently listened to a podcast. Tyler Cowen, the George Mason economist, had a slightly different take. Embraces philanthropy, but he said, you know, the choice you have to make as a businessman, as an investor, is when to go into philanthropy in some ways, because there's an alternative, which is you just keep working, keep investing. If the rate of return is so good, you can pile up more at a point well into the future that may have more value then. So, and I think that's a different point of view, right? Which is, all right, let's work like a working bee, and then leave your dollars for others to invest philanthropically at a later date. Does that resonate with you in any way, or what's your sort of?
Yeah, you know, it really doesn't. I think there's sort of a natural evolution of things in life, and each of us winds up doing the things that we like to do. And if you find something you like, you do more of it. If you find you don't like something, you do less of it. You know, think like a lot of people, by age 50, I had spent, I'd paid my dues. I spent a lot of long nights in out-of-the-way places doing things that I probably would have preferred not to have been doing. And there was just a logical time in my life when it made sense to spend less time traveling, spend more time with my family, spend more time focused on New York City, which was my home. And it just, it couldn't have worked out better in terms of the sequencing of everything.
Yeah, it makes sense.
The nice thing about being an owner of a firm or a founder is the fact that you can create your own glide path. You're not dependent on somebody else to tell you that, gee, if you're not working 40 hours a week, you're not working.
And you can do what you love, which is a new love for you, presumably. So, and I imagine you found too that your skills, your perspective as an investor had some value in the philanthropic sort of endeavors you undertook. Talk a little bit about that. What is it about being an investor? What is it about being an investor that helps prepare you to be a philanthropist? And by the way, there were 160 dots on that map. So the slide said that's a lot of opportunities to examine. How do you bring an investor's sort of lens to philanthropy?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think whatever success I had in the investment world was generally related to picking good people and good ideas. And our philanthropy has been really that. It's, you know, the great advantage I have as a philanthropist is the fact that it's my money. It's not anybody else's money. I don't have a fiduciary responsibility to anybody else. Therefore, I can do whatever I want to do. If I decide I like something, I do it. It's very simple. There's no process.
Well, we spoke about that yesterday. I asked Russ, I said, you know, how does serendipity play, you know, versus premeditation in the evaluation? Or
I think the majority of life is serendipity, as I think all of us in this room would agree. You know, things happen. Somebody comes in, they tell you an interesting story. It's something you hadn't thought about before, but it's really interesting. You do it. You make a choice to get involved philanthropically. You also make choices to what you want to get involved in with your time.
Right.
And all of that just kind of evolves over time. And you know, as I think about it, I think part of this, which I never really considered myself somebody who had a lot of intellectual curiosity, but candidly, I do think a lot of it is intellectual curiosity. It's just, I'm curious about things. I like to know about different things. One thing I always liked in the investment business was I liked making investments so I could find out what would happen. One of the things you learn in the investment world early on is if you don't make the investment, you'll never know whether it would have worked or not. It's more fun to make the investment, and even if it goes bad, you had the experience of seeing what would happen.
Yeah, well, you made an interesting
philanthropy
comment too.
Philanthropy is the same way.
Yeah, except that you said yesterday that, you know, it's hard to make a really bad philanthropic investment, which I thought was interesting that you would look at it that way, and explain some of your reasoning there.
I think it's very, well, the nonprofit world is a terrific part. It's unique to America, as most of you probably know. There's no other place in the world that has the same philanthropic community, the same thriving nonprofit community that we have in the United States. And it's, you know, it's just fascinating. It's how you solve big social problems. There are problems that can't be solved by government. There are problems that can't be solved by business. And the philanthropic and nonprofit communities basically fill that void in many ways. Again, I don't really think there are very many bad philanthropic choices that you make. Some may do better than others, but if anything, there's probably a little too much emphasis today on trying to separate the perfect from the good. And I've always thought, you know, why would you do that? If it's good, why not do it?
Well, it's also consistent with your approach, which you make a lot of bets, and it's maybe more of a venture capitalist approach than a private equity business approach, right? In private equity, we're kind of going all in on a few things a year, and it better work. But in venture capital, you can spread your bets a bit, and then where you see success, that's where you start to reinvest. And I suspect that's part of what happened with you too. You chose to get involved in things that you thought had a lot of potential to scale, that showed a lot of the signs of success, ultimately?
I think like anything else, I think you experiment, you find out which things are interesting, you find out which things look like they really have potential. Again, I like having a varied portfolio. I don't really like doing the same thing every day. So having a varied portfolio of interests keeps me intellectually challenged, keeps my family members intellectually challenged. And again, it's very similar to venture capital. You got to place a lot of bets, not all of which are going to come home in a big way.
Right. Some you have to walk away from. Some you invest more in.
And if you never took the risk, nothing would have happened.
Yeah, yeah. And in the end, they ultimately do some good along the way. You can take some comfort in that. I think that's true. So let's talk about a few of those big bets that were, some of which were featured on the film. The Partnership Schools platform. I had the good fortune to visit one of your schools a couple of years ago, and I was struck by how remarkable, the culture of the place was, and the happiness we saw running around those hallways and in the gymnasium. And then it was still early days. It's still early in its gestation, but the results are starting to come in now, it looks like. There is a real differentiation between what you can do for those communities versus the public school alternatives. Tell us a little bit about how you chose to get involved with backing the Catholic school system in New York. I know you're not a Catholic. Judy, I understand, is. But what was it about the school system, the Catholic school system, that caught your attention? And
Jim, I think it's actually a perfect story of you kind of stick your finger in, and pretty soon you're up to your elbow, and before you know it, you're up to your neck.
I know the feeling.
Judy and I started to get involved probably 35 years ago when a friend called and said, would you guys come to the Inner City Scholarship Fund annual dinner? This was a group that raised money for scholarships for kids to go to a Catholic inner city school in New York. And I didn't particularly like going to big dinners, so I said, well, I'm not going to go, but I'll send you a check. The next year, my friend called and he said, I'm inviting you again. This time I want both your check and I want you and Judy to come to the meeting. This is a big dinner, but during the dinner, a couple of kids got up and spoke, and we said, this is really pretty neat. So we, the first thing we did was we sponsored a kid by paying the scholar for one scholarship. The next thing that happened a couple of years later was they developed the Patrons program and came around and talked to us and said, we'd like you to adopt a Catholic school. And you can figure out what that means. Judy and I went to see 2 schools. They said, which one do you like? We said, we can't make up our mind. We like them both. We'll adopt them both. And I then cut a deal with the Archdiocese where we'd pay half the operating deficit of each of the schools. We went from there to a friend of mine and I raised a $100 million endowment fund to give scholarships to kids to go to Catholic inner city schools in New York City. That started, I think, as a very noble effort. After we'd been in it for a while, we began to think hard about the quality of the schools that we were sending our kids to. And again, a big advantage of not being Catholic is I can be very objective about this. And I came to the conclusion some of the schools
You mean
are very
Dolan
good.
has no effect on you? Is that what you're saying? How do you resist that?
It became clear some of the schools were very good, some of the schools were not very good. And so I started asking the question, why are we giving kids scholarships to go to the bad schools? And about the same time, the opportunity came along where the Archdiocese was about to close several of its schools. And I said to the superintendent of schools, would you like to talk about having us potentially take over some of the schools? That led to a discussion. It took us close to a year to negotiate the final deal. We started out with the assumption that we'd be equal partners with the Archdiocese. That lasted until we sent our facilities guy in to look at what might be needed in terms of capital investments in the schools. We were looking at 6 schools at the time. The answer came back $10 million. And it was obvious to me immediately the church was not about to come up with a 50% share of $10 million. So we kind of recalibrated, and I went back to the Cardinal and suggested, we'll take full responsibility. We'll put up the $10 million of capital. We'll also pay the operating deficits, which are substantial in the schools. In return, we have to have full control of the schools. And this was 6 years ago. When we started, less than 20% of our kids were passing the New York State tests. Last year, about 50% of our kids passed the state tests. So dramatic increase in performance. And all of that was led really by a combination of things, running a longer school day, holding the teachers and the staffs accountable for the performance of the kids, holding the kids accountable for themselves. And for me, it's probably my #1 charity in that we're touching 2,000 lives every year, and I'd like to think that some significant percentage of those kids are going to have a better life because we gave them a K through 8 education they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. That we, not all of them are going to be successful in life. There'll be failures, but I think by and large we set them on the path where if we can do nothing more than create a higher percentage of good citizens out of this process, the money that we spend will be well
I think
worth it.
The other fascinating thing about the partnership schools is it's really a model for what might other archdioceses do with some of their tougher schools, right? Where they're now completely stretched, as you sort of alluded to. They have a very difficult time helping fund it, let alone oversee these schools. So I know the Chicago Archdiocese is looking at that very model that you all created. How do we take some schools and move them to operators, people who care, philanthropists who are focused, and so it really is the beginning of, I think, of a trend here that could really help make Catholic schools even better in places where it needs to be. So.
Yeah, I would agree that Jim. And I think on two dimensions. One, the education has to be better than what's being delivered today because we live in a very competitive world. And number two, the church can't afford to keep paying the cost.
And neither can the community. Yeah. Unless there's school choice. And so I need to thank you for something else, which is I know you're a good friend of Tom Carroll's.
Yes.
And you were behind his efforts, a group of philanthropists to try to get a school choice, a tax credit scholarship bill passed in New York. You came awfully close. It didn't work out.
Yep.
But a group of us in Chicago watched very carefully what you were doing. Tom actually came in and advised us, and we were able to get a blue state, the first of its kind, school choice bill passed a couple of years ago. We're hanging on by our fingernails, but thank you for your work with that. And as you think about the future of inner city alternative schools, whether Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Montessori, allowing parents to have more choices ultimately with their tax dollars. Will that day come? Are we going to see that day in these major metropolitan? At some point, I look at Chicago.
I think it's a challenge, Jim. It's a political challenge. And I should also say Catholic schools are one thing that we're doing in the education area. We also support charter schools in a big way. My daughter Cecily is on the board of both one of the big charter organizations, and she's on the board of the New York City Charter Center, which helps create new schools. I think the political issue is a difficult one where, as adults in our society, we need to conclude that education really is important. The key to the United States remaining at the top of the heap for the next 100 years is we've got to improve our school system. We're falling behind the rest of the world. We're not nearly as good as we think we are. And the way to get there is to have alternatives and prove that things can work. We've already proven the 6 schools, now about to be 7 schools, our Catholic schools have done dramatically better than the neighborhood public schools in their neighborhoods. So we're proving that it can work. And we're doing it for about almost a third of the cost of what the public is spending per kid on their education.
It's remarkable. Thank you for your work there. Just looking at some of the big projects with the Archdiocese on the schools, Rockefeller University, the Genome Project, in all 3 cases, working with established institutions to help them make what they're doing better. Is there a theme there at all? Are you able to leverage institutions in a way that you can get more value ultimately for the philanthropic investment, or am I misperceiving some of the?
Well, I think the New York Genome Center is a good example of. New York City has some of the best medical science in the country. I think we rank number 3 in the country in National Institute of Health grants, so government grants for medical science. In New York, the institutions historically had tended to be very siloed. Everybody kind of thought they were the best. They did things themselves. They didn't cooperate that much with each other. And the New York Genome Center was an opportunity to try and get a group of them working together to pursue a technology that was probably too expensive and too early stage for any of them to individually make the investment that was necessary. I jumped on board very early, and we wound up getting 12 institutions. It's everybody: Columbia, NYU, the hospitals, Mount Sinai, New York Presbyterian. Anybody who's anybody in the healthcare and medical science world in New York jumped in as an institutional limited partner. Each of them put up $2.5 million as part of the seed capital. I'd like to think I was the catalyst on the philanthropic side. Part of my pitch to them was I agreed to put up $5 million initially. I put up a whole lot more than that since then. But we've raised close to $400 million of capital since we started this exercise. We started about 8 years ago. And we've built a world-class medical research activity. For those of you who don't know anything about genomics, it's the coming science that's going to unlock personalized medicine, which is being able to look at somebody who's seriously ill and finding out what uniquely is wrong with them and what uniquely is the way that they should be treated. This is a huge database exercise.
But great science in these institutions that you knitted together effectively, right, to create something more that they wouldn't have done on their own separately.
Well, one of our projects right now is we have what we call the Polyethnic 1000 Cancer Study, where we're taking tissue samples from 1,000 people of different races in New York City, these are all patients of our hospitals that are our member institutions in New York. 1,000 patient samples, trying to determine what are the racial differences in cancer. There clearly are differences, but what are they? What are the genetic differences of somebody who's black or yellow or brown or white that happens to have what may appear to be the same disease, but it really isn't. It has a different genetic signature to it.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to talk to you about something that's very important to you, which is the involvement of your family and your philanthropy. You've taken a tack which has been much more, I'm going to do this myself, heavy personal involvement, involve the family. You started with the DAF. You just recently moved to a foundation. Talk to us a little bit about your thinking around how to do philanthropy and involve the family, and your own journey from that towards a foundation I understand you recently hired a foundation.
I think one of the most satisfying things about our foundation is getting my family members involved in it. I have 2 children, Cecily, who's here, who's 47, our son Ed is 44. We started having family.
You're not supposed to say that, Russ. Come on.
She's a little old, but otherwise she's a nice person. We started having conversations around the dinner table where Judy and I began talking about the things that we were interested in. We began to talk about organizations that we liked. Both of our kids in high school, they had very good social programs in the school where the kids went out and were exposed to some local charities. I'm happy to say both our kids have very strong social consciences, so this has been a labor of love for them as well as for Judy and I. But we slowly evolved from sitting around the dinner table where usually we'd get halfway into the conversation, somebody would get upset about something, get mad, leave. And so then we started having the meetings in my office where it was a little more formal and it was a little harder for people to leave.
To scream and yell, right?
And we've now taken the ultimate leap, which 2 years ago, we set up a family office, which Cecily and I occupy full-time, together with Amy Stevens, who's here with us, who's our executive vice president, Dorothy Roberts, who's worked with me for almost 40 years now as my assistant. But we formalized the whole process. And again, this was all part, for me, of the glide path of moving out of my business into something that had its own very separate identity and was something that my kids could continue after Judy and I are no longer here. But we have regular discussions. We have regular quarterly board meetings. It's a very well-organized activity. The reality is that any one of the 4 of us can pretty much do whatever we want to do. We each have slightly different interests, but we have enough money that we can afford to finance everything that
and I think
people would like to do.
You've also instituted a sunset clause on the Family Foundation. Talk about the pros and cons of having of sunsetting provision on the foundation.
When I first started to think seriously about this, which was probably 30 years ago, I made a couple of decisions which I think turned out to be critical. One was that we couldn't solve all of the world's problems with the money that we had and that I thought we were likely to have in the future. So we should concentrate our philanthropy where it really could make a difference. And in our case, that was New York City, which was our home base. So very focused on institutions that are in New York. We don't give money to the American Cancer Society or any of the big national organizations. Focus on New York City. We try and take an active role in as many of the things that we support as possible. I think as a family, we sit on probably 15 nonprofit boards now. So you give time as well as money. You play an active role. You step up and take a leadership role, which I've been able to do, and my family members to different degrees have done the same thing. And I also thought that it didn't make sense to lock away a sizable amount of money for an infinite period of time. It made sense to me. I'll be gone by the time my grandchildren are really thinking adults. And I didn't want to just leave a bunch of money that would be given away in the future by some group of people that didn't know me and Judy and know what our values were. So it made perfect sense to say our money should be given away in a finite time period. After thinking about it for a while, I said it should be our generation and our direct children's generation. So we picked the year 2050, which is an arbitrary date, but all of the money in the foundation, which also includes my net worth, Judy and I, as part of our estate planning, all of our estates go into the foundation, but all of it will be given away by the year 2050 or the death of our last child. I just think that makes perfect sense, Jim. And from having been in the investment world, you learn the present value of a dollar. A dollar spent today is more valuable than a dollar spent 10 years from now.
We're doing the same sort
or
of
100 years from now.
Yeah, we have the same plan. So there's been a lot of talk about curbing tax deductibility for charitable donations and more transparencies around DAF. A lot of suspicion about what is going on in the philanthropic world, it seems. What's your take on all that? Do you worry about that?
Yeah, I think it's misplaced. I would say that I've never made a charitable donation because I got a tax deduction for it. Candidly, my charitable donations are so much larger than my ability to take a tax deduction for them. So for me, taxes have never been an important issue, but I think for some people they are, and particularly for smaller givers. And it would be ridiculous for our society to somehow decide that we shouldn't encourage philanthropy. And it not only would be ridiculous, I also think it would be terribly egotistical of our government to think that government can give your money away better than you can give it away. I do think for all of us in this room, I suspect we all have the same feeling that I'm a much better steward of my money than the government is, and I'd like to give away as much of my money as possible and not have the government making those choices for me. So I'm surprised there's such a receptive audience for that idea. But so I don't, the other thing I'd say, Jim, and I think I said it at the outset, the United States is unique. We travel, Judy and I have been all over the world. There is no place else in the world like the United States in terms of the pioneer spirit, the fact that you help your neighbor, the culture we have here of community involvement. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the developed world. And it would be very foolish of the government to try and interfere with that.
Well, congratulations again on this prestigious Simon Prize. And I want you to know that you have been a role model for me and for so many in the investment world. So thank you for all you've done.
Oh, thank you, gentlemen. Thank all you for being here.
I mean it. Thank you so much.
Very well done. Thank you, Jim.
He's good, huh?
Thank you, Jim and Russ, for a very insightful, interesting, and informative conversation on philanthropy. I know I speak for many in the audience when I say that we have learned much from the opportunity to listen to two successful business leaders who have used their talent and resources to improve their hometowns. Russ, we're so pleased that you have joined the ranks of the Simon Prize winners. And I know my dad would be proud to be associated with you, and we certainly are. I hope you will take some lessons learned today as you continue in your journey in philanthropy. I know I will. And please remember that the nomination process for the 2020 Simon Prize will open soon, and I hope that if any of you have a suggestion for a candidate, please contact Adam or someone at the Philanthropy Roundtable. You can call me too. that's that. We now have about 15 minutes until the sessions start again, and you can all take a well-deserved break. And thank you very much for participating in this great lunch.